Okay, so this is the second half of the social psychology material. A big chunk of this is on prejudice. It's nearly impossible to try to distill that down to 15 minutes. So I'm going to touch on a few topics, and then if we have time, I'll talk about helping and aggression and a little about attraction. So I teach the whole semester on social psychology, so it's hard to do anything in a short amount. First of all, basic human cognition is about, if you go back to the development chapter, about us as little kids growing up and trying to understand the world. Remember the sensory motor stage. One of the very first things kids begin to do, all of us as children, is put things and people into categories. The very first categories that kids will typically put people into have to do with race, age, and gender, male or female or sex. So that is just something that kids do, and all of us do to everyone typically, in order to make the world more predictable. If I see someone, it's like, okay, this is what I'm going to expect out of this person. I see someone else, this is what I'm going to expect out of that person. It is a way of trying to simplifying the world, going back to that whole idea that I talked about in the last video called the cognitive miser theory, that we don't want to think too hard. We want to keep things simple. The problem with that is that we're often wrong when we do that. The problem with prejudice, I mean, so you have the stereotypes that go along, but then prejudice stems from those stereotypes. And people make judgments based on, oh, you're a member of this group, this must be true for you. Obviously, groups are so complex and diverse, that doesn't work. The differences within groups are ignored. And then one of the things that comes out of prejudice, basically, is like, if we are looking to other people to say, you're in my in-group and you're not part of my in-group, so you're the out-group. I mean, in very simple terms, you can do that at Lincoln, like when Lincoln plays a sports game, we say, oh, we're all Lincoln folks, and then that other team, they're the other team, so that they're bad, we want to win. But in real life, it comes down to racism, it comes down to homophobia, it comes down to prejudice against people of different religions. And basically what happens is someone's not seen as a member of one's own in-group, that can then translate into dehumanizing someone else, not seeing them as fully complex human beings that they are. Prejudice can be all different styles. It can be very hostile and direct. We know what that looks like. That's traditional racism and prejudice. Sometimes it can be hidden. And that's typically, I think of like when a white person is like prejudiced, and then they're like overly nice to someone who's black or someone who's not white. And they'll be like totally uncomfortable, but they're not willing to admit, acknowledge, and work on their own prejudice. Prejudice can also be microaggressions. That's small dismissals, small assumptions that can start to eat away at a person, especially if you're a member of a minority group. It's like, wait, why do you assume that about me? Why do you assume that about me? One video I used to show in class involved basically having a high school principal assume this one student, because he was Mexican, that he was also Catholic. It's like, that's not necessarily true. Then those small little things start to build up after time, and they can accumulate and create a lot of stress. And then what happens a lot of times is that after a person experiences many, many microaggressions, they go off. They're like, okay, I'm sick of this. And then others would be like, well, why are you being so sensitive? It's like, well, you don't understand. That person just went through several days of people making stupid assumptions about them because of their group membership. Prejudice can also be related to color blindness. I've heard white people say, like, I don't see color. That's stupid. Color matters in this country. Race matters in this country. Whether you're talking about socioeconomically, money, or you're talking about politics, job opportunities, it matters. And so those color blindness does not work. I used to work with a woman who was an African-American supervisor of mine in grad school, and she wrote an entire scale on color blindness. And what we found, we actually collected data at Lincoln, was that students, when they took the Lincoln Cultural Diversity class, from the beginning to the end, the white students became less colorblind. The black students didn't start out colorblind, and they didn't end up colorblind. But the white students changed because of the intervention of a semester-long class, which was something interesting to see. Also, prejudice can be paternalistic, like the whole idea someone comes in from a position of privilege and saying like, oh, I'm basically assuming I'm better than you and you need my help. It's condescending. It's bad, and that can be really damaging because it's an assumption that someone can't perform as well or do as well because of a member of a group that they're in. Also, prejudice can be just one-on-one. You know what that looks like. But the institutional is harder to see, but it's out there. And I have a couple of video clips that you can click on. They both take a little more time to do that, but you can click on these slides here. The institutional prejudice has to do with systems of racism. If you've never heard about redlining, look it up. It's basically how people in, especially the U.S., who have been traditionally in positions of power and privilege, typically white men, they use those advantages to protect their own financial interests and then just basically run over everybody else. And then when called upon it, white men will typically say like, well, I'm just looking out for the best. It's like, no, you're looking out for your own group's interest. Also, you can have internalized prejudice, where a person is prejudiced against the members of their own minority group. That's, you probably have witnessed that too, or maybe even felt that. Let's see, the roots of prejudice. I can't believe how fast I'm going through this. So typically I spend a lot longer on all this material. I have tons of examples I'd like to give, but we're going to keep going. Let's go back to chapter 6, learning theory, classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and observational learning. That's where prejudice comes from. We learn it when we're little kids. I mean, you can imagine like if a little white kid is with his mom and she sees someone who's black and she clutches her purse close to her. That little kid, without even words being said, is going to pick up through classical conditioning. My mom's intense. She's upset. She's like really anxious now. And they're just going to be classically conditioned to have that same response to someone who's of another race when they see them. So that's classical conditioning. Operant conditioning is just simply being rewarded and punished for sharing the same views that other people have. So if you grow up in a community, a church, a home that's racist or prejudiced, and then you start espousing those beliefs and those are reinforced, that's just nailing in that prejudice even further. And then observational learning, obviously. We watch and learn from others in our family, our communities, at school, everywhere. We pick it up from society, media, every place. So that's clear. Also, though, part of learning theory is that we are cognitive misers. We don't want to think more complexly about other people. So we'll just use these stereotypes. And then if we have something try to challenge our stereotype, we will come up with, oh, they're an exception. I'm not going to change my overall stereotype, but I'll just say that person's different from the rest. And I'll just create a little subcategory because I don't want to change my overall belief. It's only when that stereotype gets overwhelmed with counterexamples will a person be willing to change that. There's something called confirmation bias too. And a famous study was done there I'm going to describe to you, where the researchers brought in big groups of elementary school teachers, and they sat all of them down. Half of the people, they said, here's a picture of a little girl. And she was standing in front, this is about money. She was standing in front of a poor house wearing raggedy clothes, and there's like a car up on blocks in the driveway. The other half of these teachers saw a different picture of the same little girl, and she was in front of like a rich home, nice car in the driveway, nice clothes. Then they said, okay, so we're going to show you a video of this girl taking an intelligence test. And they then showed a video and when they filmed this video, they did this on purpose. They told that little girl in the intelligence test, okay, now half the time when you're taking this test, do your best, answer the questions right as you can, pay attention. And then the other half of the time, just mess around, like get the questions wrong, look out the window, play with your pencil, tie your shoes, be distracted. So half the time the girls were on target, and half the time she was off target. All these teachers saw the same exact video. When it was over, they went and asked the teachers, how'd that kid do on that test? You can already guess what they said. And the whole thing was, so the teachers who saw the picture of her beforehand in front of a poor house said she didn't do very well. The ones who saw her in front of a rich house said she did well. but they all saw the exact same video. So the researchers pushed further. They said, why do you think didn't she do well? It's like, well, didn't you see the people who saw her in front of the poorhouse, didn't you see her in that video? She was looking out the window, playing with her pencil, getting questions wrong. The people who saw her in front of the rich house said, didn't you see her in that video? She was answering these questions right. She was right on target, paying attention. Those folks were looking for evidence to confirm the stereotypes that were stimulated by that photo they'd seen originally. And that's what's called confirmation bias. That we go out into the world with our stereotypes and we don't look for any evidence to change us or to change our own mind. We look for evidence to confirm that we're right. And that creates a lot of problems with perpetuating stereotypes and prejudice. Okay, another aspect of prejudice, where it comes from, there's what's known as a social dominance orientation. Basically, it has to do with privilege, and we'll talk a little bit about privilege here in just a second. That is the notion of a person has a lot of privilege, and then they see someone who doesn't have it, they're going to assume like, oh, I think this goes with a just world belief, that they, if they don't have power, they don't have money, they must not have deserved it. They must not have worked hard enough. And I'm the one in charge. I'm the one who has the power here. I deserve that. Some have argued that this should be a psychological disorder, this social dominance orientation, this one that the strong survive and that everybody else deserves what they get. So I'm going to click on down. That's the description of the study I described with the little girl. I want to talk just briefly about privilege. If you have me in social psychology or other classes, I will talk a long time about this. Privilege is the unearned advantages based only on a person's group membership. Who in this country is privileged? Men, obviously. White people, obviously. And the problem with that is that a lot of times people are just going to say well, to me as a white guy, well, you're privileged. And so as a professor with a PhD, I say like, no, I worked hard for my grades. I worked hard. I deserve this. I'm not privileged. I'm a hard worker, and I did my best to really be able to have the position I have right now. But that is not acknowledging the privileges I had just because of who I was and where I was born. The fact is, I mean, the township in Indiana where I grew up, some rich guy died and then provided all these full ride scholarships, tuition, room and board, fees, everything for 4 years for people who scored in the top of their class in that township. I got a full ride and I didn't have a single dime of student loans or anything because of that. That's privilege. So yeah, I may have worked hard, but there were things that I could not control that were unearned advantages because of my group membership. And that happens in other areas too. I mean, it happens in terms of gender, sex. Dr. Argetti, who's a psychology professor here at Lincoln, she and I started the same year, teaching the same classes, and they were paying me $3,000 more a year than they were paying her. Why? Because I'm a guy. Yeah, that's a privilege. You can think about it in terms of religion. Obviously, Christianity is privileged above other religions in this country. And it's just assumed that other people will be okay when prayers are said to a Christian God in public. Actually, it's happened at Lincoln graduation ceremonies. And it's like, and my colleagues who are Jewish or atheists are expected to just suck it up. Come on, everybody's Christian here. That's privilege too. So being aware, one sense of privilege, how it's affected you, that's all our jobs. Disability status, sexual orientation, all those things are aspects of privilege. Obviously, when you combine it with a just world belief and a privileged person thinks I deserve this good stuff, then it's basically look at the people who don't have the privilege and say, well, they must not have worked hard enough to deserve it. That is oppression, and that's just unearned disadvantages based only on group membership. One aspect of research more recently on prejudice and stereotypes is that, there's an aspect of resilience that comes with being a member of a minority group that can really help a person basically be resistant to the negative effects of discrimination. And that is learning about one's own racial group and pride. And this also would be other groups too. Being able to plug into a community that you identify with and feeling supported by people that you see as similar to yourself. Spirituality is another piece of that resilience that often goes along with being part of an in-group. It's like we share this kind of worldview or belief, and educating oneself about one's own group too. These are aspects of resilience that can help mitigate the effects of living with systematic discrimination and prejudice. I'm going to stop this video here, and then I'll have one more video having to do with altruism, aggression, and attraction. Thanks.